I'm Afshin Rattansi. We're at the Presidential Palace in Damascus. Welcome to a RT International World Exclusive. I'm with the President of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Mr. President, thanks for granting us an interview. I've got to ask to start off with, why grant an interview now when you haven't done for a year and a half?
You're most welcome in Syria. The events in the world in general, in the region and in Syria after the Turkish invasion has brought Syria front and center once again. This is one reason. The second one, I think the public opinion in the world, and especially in the West, has been shifting during the last few years. They know that their officials has told them so many lies about what's going on in the region, in the Middle East, in Syria, in Yemen. They know there's a lie, but they know what the truth. So I think it's time to talk about this truth. Third, I made so many interviews with the Western media outlets. They don't try to get the information. They try to get a scoop. They don't try to be objective, to bring the audience what's happening in the world. That's why I stopped doing interviews for 4 years.
Well, okay, well, the journey from Damascus airport, we saw reconstruction, but how many civilians, how many soldiers have been killed, wounded, or displaced from your country in the past, since 2011?
The stability that you saw during the last 24 hours in Damascus, since you arrived to Damascus, is the result of the sacrifice of more than 100,000 Syrian soldiers who are martyred or wounded. So many lives, and of course, let alone the thousands or maybe tens of thousands of civilians or innocents who've been killed by martyrs, by executions, by being kidnapped and killed later or disappeared. Their families still waiting till now. So there was a lot of sacrifice in the face of those terrorists. That's why you see this stability and the reconstruction.
Countries that have supported you include Iran, of course, Russia. I mean, I want to get on in a bit to the British and American de facto backing for ISIS, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda in your country. But what would you say to a Russian family that had lost a Russian soldier who had risked and had sacrificed their life for a dictator, for a Middle East dictator? What would you say to them as to why Vladimir Putin should be sending in soldiers to help your government?
You mentioned a very important point. Even in Syria, no one would die for a person. People would die, especially en masse, for a cause. And this cause is defending their country, defending their existence, their future. Let alone somebody coming from another country to die for a person, whether he's a dictator or whatever you want to call him. So this is not realistic. This is, again, the logic that somebody will come from because the President Putin sent him to die for another person. Or even President Putin to put all the interests of his country for one person. This is against the logic. Actually, Russia, according to what they said, their officials, I mean President Putin, Lavrov, and the others, they are defending their interests in different ways. One aspect, if they defend or if they fight terrorism in another country, whether it's Syria or any other country in the region, that will defend the Russian people, because terrorism and its ideology has no borders. They don't see political borders. It's one, let's say, one arena. The whole world is one arena for the terrorism. Second, they implement and they adopt the international law. According to their point of view, this international law, if it's implemented, it's in correlation with their interests, with their national interests. So implementing the international law around the world will help the interest of the Russian people. So what they've been doing is in accordance with the national interest, with the global stability, and with the Syrian interest and Syrian stability.
Now, you know that in media in NATO countries, this country, your government, you personally, are synonymous with chemical weapons attacks. Let's just go back to one in 21st of August 2013 in Ghouta. Did your government drop chemical weapons on Ghouta on that date, 21st August 2013?
The funny thing about that date is the same date where the first delegation that wants to investigate, the international delegation that came to Syria to investigate the incident, arrived to Damascus, which is only a few kilometers from this place. And logically, the Syrian army, if we support that he has chemical weapon, he wants to use it, he wouldn't use it at that day. This first. Second, they talked about 200 civilians killed. If you use chemical weapons, you may kill tens of thousands in such area where people living very close to each other. I mean, it's a crowded area. Third, that incident only existed in the mind of the Western officials. It's the narrative that was the pretext to attack Syria. That's what happened. They didn't offer any tangible evidence to prove that there was such attacks. And there were many reports that show that has refuted that report or those allegations. So it was only allegation. Never ever the Syrian army used chemical weapons before he handed over all his arsenals to the international committee.
But of course, you took the decision then to invite the OPCW in to remove chemical weapons or to...
Actually, when there were such allegations about the Syrian army
in 2014.
Sorry?
You authorized OPCW monitors in 2014 to come
Actually, we invited them to come. We didn't authorize, we invited them to come because we told them, you should come and should investigate because we are sure, 100% sure that these are allegations. But of course, the delegation not always unbiased, as you know. They are mostly biased.
Well, I mean, the present OPCW head, Fernando Arias, he may have his own problems with whistleblowers now. Yeah. There is no doubt, though, that Ahmet Uzumcu, he was the Director General of the OPCW who monitored the destruction here. He said there were gaps, uncertainties, discrepancies in your OPCW monitored destruction of chemical weapons here in this country.
Gap in our reports.
Yeah.
Why don't they show it? Now it's been since 2013, we've been hearing the same allegations. Couldn't they prove it after 6 years? And every time they say Syria has used chemical weapons, is it possible to be under this precise, let's say, supervision by the whole Western world? And we're going to use it again and again. This is not rational. I mean, the whole story. We don't need it. We are advancing. I mean, every time they talk about using the chemical weapons, it was when we advance, not when we lose. I mean, even militarily, you may use, if you want to use such weapons, I'm not talking about the Syrian army because we don't have it anymore, but logically, you can use it when you're losing ground, not when you're advancing.
So you deny the use in Jobar, Sheikh Massoud, Sarakib, in the area of Aleppo. You presumably deny Khan Sheikhoun, 4th of April 2017. All of these, you deny the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government.
Every story was nothing more than allegation. The one who said there was use of chemical weapon, he's the one who should prove his story. He's the one who should offer evidences that it's been used.
Well, the OPCW did lead Britain and the United States and France to believe they needed to bomb your country on the basis of their report.
To believe, but believe is one thing and bringing evidence is another thing. So we are talking about evidence. What the evidence that they have to prove their story? Nothing. They have nothing at all.
Any truth in the rumors, arguably on your side, saying video evidence has been manipulated and that rebels were using chemical weapons via the Saudi Arabian government, and chemical weapons were indeed used, but by the so-called rebels?
Yeah, it's on the YouTube, you can see it. I mean, they staged play, full play, where somebody play the role of a victim in many incidents, not only with the chemical weapons, even with the bombardments. They stage play that somebody is being the victim. Then at the end of the shooting, he's a normal person. He'll stand up and go move normally. You can see it on YouTube. It's very clear. We can offer you this evidence.
But there's no other evidence beyond that, because the white helmets, supported by the British Foreign Office government, recently been given extra funding by the Trump administration. They claim their videos are absolutely true, and that in fact the people who are making those videos saved 150,000 lives in your country up to 2018.
Again, it's very simple to see the same faces of those angels, the white helmets. The same face of the same one in the white helmets was a fighter with Al-Qaeda. You can see him, the images are very clear. The same one who was being beheading or cutting head, and one of them was being eating the heart of a soldier. I mean, this is very common to see on the internet. The evidence, I mean, if no one in this region believed the stunt, the PR stunt of the white helmets. They are offshoot of al-Nusra.
Well, the UK state-mandated BBC, Amnesty International, they're alleging your government killed 11,000 people using so-called barrel bombs from 2012. That would be a violation of UN Security Council Resolution 2139. And indeed, Human Rights Watch is pointing to satellite imagery. You're talking about YouTube videos, saying they're fake videos. These are some of NATO nations' biggest NGOs and broadcasters.
No war is a good war. This is self-evident truth. You always have victims in any war, but to talk about an army or a state to go and kill civilians and its own people, this is not realistic for a simple reason. The war in Syria was about capturing the hearts of the people, and you cannot capture the heart of the people by bombarding them. The Syrian army was fighting the terrorists. Whether there's a side fire that affected some civilian, that could have happened, and you can have investigations. But how could the Syrian people support their state and their president and their army if they are killing them?
Was the only way to regain East Aleppo, did your commanders or you personally authorize the only way to get rid of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh, arguably backed by Britain and the United States, the only way to get rid of them was aerial bombardment?
We definitely, and we succeeded. In some areas, we captured the area without war. We made negotiations with those groups, and they left that area, and then we entered.
But you've seen the pictures, and you presumably say those pictures are true, of the destruction in East Aleppo. Was that really the only way to defeat Al-Qaeda, ISIS-linked groups?
Those groups in eastern Aleppo used to bombard the civilians on a daily basis and killed hundreds of thousands of people in Aleppo. So the mission of the army and the mission of the state is to protect those civilians from those terrorists. How can we do that without attacking the terrorists?
Well, that's not shown on media in NATO nations, I should add, in your defense. But what about the use of double tap strikes by the Syrian and the Russian Air Force, where you bomb a part of East Aleppo and then emergency workers come and you bomb again?
There are a lot of misleading narrative in the West, just to show that the Syrian army is intentionally killing the civilians without no reason, and to show that those that they call them like white helmets or any other hospital which is headquarters for the terrorists, they say that the Syrian army is only attacking the humanitarian facilities in order for the civilians to suffer. Actually, what happened is the opposite, that those civilians fled those areas and came to the government side in every place, not only in eastern Aleppo. Those people now, if you go to eastern Aleppo, they still live in those areas, under the supervision of the government. Why didn't we kill them? Why didn't they fled to Turkey? This is in itself refute the Western narrative.
But as I said, Raid Saleh, the head of the British-backed White Helmet, spoke on my program and said, they are just a humanitarian organization. They are not terrorists at all, despite what you and the Russian government allege.
But you have pictures, you have videos, you have proofs. So it's not, we don't have any allegations. How did we know? Through their images. We can offer you all this evidence. We have evidence. It's very clear.
I mean, going back a little to the first demonstrations in Daria in Damascus, there was a famous, again, BBC state-mandated British media program in which they interviewed, of all people, Walid Jumlat of the Druze in Beirut, who said to camera that you authorized the killing of the 13-year-old Hamza al-Khatib. Is that true? And that they then interviewed a succession of people saying the mistakes you made led to what happened. It wasn't the British and American backing of Al-Qaeda and ISIS Daesh in your country.
At the very beginning, during the demonstrations, during the first few days, we lost 5 policemen by shooting, by bullets. How could we talk about peaceful demonstrations while you have policemen killed by...
But how could you authorize the killing of a 13-year-old?
Yeah, I'm just starting from the very beginning. So from the very beginning, I mean, the word peaceful demonstrations wasn't correct. There was shooting, and you cannot tell who's shooting at the police and who's the one who's shooting at the civilians, because in most of the incidents that time, the police didn't have even machine gun or pistol.
Except this child was tortured.
No, that's not true. He's not. We never had
The cigarette burns on his body.
He was killed. No, he was killed. He was killed, and there was allegation that he was tortured. He wasn't tortured. He was killed and was taken to the hospital. And I met with his parents. They know the real story. This is only in the Western outlets, in the Western media outlets. This is not the story in Syria. So that's why I'm surprised about those stories that are completely disconnected from our reality. He's somebody who died. How did he die? Who shot? Nobody knows. It was chaos. When you have chaotic demonstrations, anyone could infiltrate that demonstration and start shooting in different directions and kill policemen in order to retaliate, or vice versa.
So have you heard of Anwar Raslan and Ed Al-Gharib, who've been arrested in Germany? The Germans alleging something called Bloc 251, one of your torture units, to torture demonstrators?
We don't have torture unit. We don't have torture policy in Syria. Why do you use the torture for? That's the question. Why? Is it psychological situation? You just want to torture people? This is kind of sadism. Why to torture? You need information? You have all the information. The majority of the Syrian people supported their government. That's why we've been here for 9 years, in spite all of this aggression by the West and by the petrodollar in the Arab region. That's why, this is the only reason. So why do you torture the people? That's the question. It's not policy. If you talk about individual incidents, this is only individual incident that could happen by anyone for revenge, for any other reason, that could happen anywhere in the world. But we don't have such policy. We never believe in that torture could make your situation better as a state. Very simple. So we don't use it now.
What did you make of it when the British government sent the Royal Navy to intercept an Iranian vessel? They said, the Iranian government said it was with heating oil for Syria. Are the sanctions from the European Union going to hit the poorest people in Syria this winter?
Exactly. First of all, this is piracy. This is piracy by the United Kingdom regime. And this is the core meaning of the word regime, because regime and piracy in gangs is something similar. Second, yes, they wanted to affect the people in Syria. Why? Because those people expected to rise against their government during the different stages of the war, but they didn't. They were supposed to be supporting the terrorists, the moderate rebels, the angels of white helmets, but the people didn't. They stood with their government. So they have to suffer. They have to pay the price. First of all, they have to learn the lesson that you should have stood with their agenda. Second, this is maybe the last-ditch attempt in order to push them to be against the government. But they tried it last winter, they tried it before, and they didn't work because the people knew the whole story and they knew where their interest lies.
People in the global south, you and your government ministers may think it's natural to accuse NATO governments of supporting Al-Qaeda, of ISIS. But viewers watching this interview in those NATO countries may think this is ridiculous. Why would the British government say, or the Obama government, because I suppose Donald Trump arguably has suddenly realized what may have been going on. Why do you think they wanted to support Al-Qaeda and ISIS-Daesh?
Why? Because of the facts. These facts started with the fact that the American officials, before anyone else, said verbally with their tongue, like John Kerry, like Hillary Clinton, and many others, when they talked about their role in supporting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan in order to be a tool against the Soviet Union at that time. They said this is their modus operandi. It's not something we invented.
But they saw 9/11. Why would they make the same mistake again?
Because the American policy in general depends on trials and errors. They invaded Afghanistan, they got nothing. They invaded Iraq, they got nothing. And they started to invade other countries, but in different ways. They change the way. The problem in the United States now, they fight a survival war from their point of view, because they are losing their hegemony. So they wanted to fight the Russian, the Iranian, the Syrian, whoever said no. Even their allies, if they said no, like the Western government, they will fight with them. They need tools. They noticed that in Iraq, it didn't work by sending their army. They lost a lot. And they paid the price even inside the United States. So it's much easier for them to send a proxy. So Al-Qaeda is a proxy against the Syrian government, against the Russian government, and the Iranian government. That's why they've been using this. But you have evidence. ISIS, how did ISIS rose suddenly in 2014? Out of nowhere, out of nothing, in Iraq and Syria at the same time, with American armaments? It's very clear. How could they smuggle millions of barrels of oil to Turkey under the supervision of the American aircraft? How? Because the American wanted to use them against the Syrian army. So it's not something we said. The Americans said that, and the facts said the same story.
But while all this has been going on, you have been talking with international bodies and different interlocutors. What do you make of the UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, saying, in quotations in the past few days, having really fought against what happened in Aleppo, Idlib, in Daria, I could not be the one that is shaking Assad's hand and saying, Malesh. These are the people you were talking to as neutral observers. Looking back on it, were any of these people neutral?
He cannot be in that position if he's neutral, because the United States will only accept puppets. This is their behavior.
But you did shake hands with them.
And he asked later to meet with me, and I said no. But so he wanted to shake my hand. He wanted to. He was biased. That's why he failed. He was implementing the American agenda, maybe in a little bit smarter way, but it didn't work because he was biased. That's why.
And what is this Geneva process? There have been some reports that the Syrian delegation was backed by your government, but not representing the Syrian government. What exactly is this Geneva process? Post-conflict? I'm not even sure it's called that.
It's American ploy. It's about gaining in politics what you couldn't get through the demonstration first and through the terrorist later. So you can get it through political process. That's why, again, it didn't work. That's why Geneva failed, because it was about toppling the government through interim interim body, let's say, doesn't matter what is it, then change the government peacefully and control Syria like they did in many other countries. That's why Geneva failed, and that's why we went to Sochi with the Russian. That's why Sochi now is working. We had this delegation last month, and they started last week negotiating the constitution.
So when Donald Trump announces...
Sorry, are you asking about this Geneva or about...
Oh yeah, I was talking about this Geneva.
Oh, if you talk about this Geneva is only the venue, the place, the geography, but I mean, the political process is still Sochi. It's Sochi. Doesn't matter where we convene or where we start the negotiation. It's Sochi.
But of course, in mainstream Western media, in media in NATO nations, it's Geneva, not Sochi.
Of course,
and do you believe that this curious story that the Russians are saying that the USA is stealing $30 million of oil a month from northern Syria, is this a Trump bargaining chip in the Geneva talks? Why would a net oil exporter like the USA be interested in $30 million of oil a month?
No, since ISIS started smuggling Syrian oil and looting Syrian oil in 2014, they had two partners, Erdogan and his coterie, and the American, whether CIA or others. So what Trump did is just announced the truth. He's not talking about something new. Even when some of the Kurds started looting the Syrian oil, the American were their partners. So it's about money and it's about oil. And that's what Trump said recently, but it's not new at all. It's not related to the talks at all.
But arguably, why are you not more angry? Because obviously that would be a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention on pillaging of a country's resources.
Of course we are angry. Every Syrian is angry, definitely. This is looting, but there's no international order, actually. And there's no international law. But this is not new, to be frank, not only during the war. The Americans always try to loot other countries in different way, regarding their not only oil or money or financial resources. They loot their rights, political rights, every other right. That's their historical role, at least after World War II. So it's not something new. It's not strange or disconnected from their previous policy, but if from time to time it takes different shape, and this shape, looting the oil, the starkest way of the American policy, looting the rights of other people.
Was a big part of the war fossil fuel pipeline access to Europe from the Middle East that would cut Russian pipeline access to the European Union?
This is very realistic, but some say that they ask the president to open Syria for a pipeline, south-north, and he said no for the Russian. Actually, that didn't happen. This is not true. But there was a pipeline that's coming east-west from Iran through Iraq, Syria to the Mediterranean. If this one was a reason, it could be. If the war is about the oil as a factor, yes, this is likely to be. But this is not the only factor. Don't forget that there's a war between United States and the rest of the world. You have now, we're talking about tectonic shifting and earthquakes because the world order after World War II has been expired, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union and one polar world. It doesn't work anymore. So you have rising power like Russia and China and India and other countries. The United States doesn't accept any partner in leading the world, even UK, even France, even other big country. I wouldn't call them great power because this is another meaning. They're not great anymore. They don't accept partners. That's why they are fighting now. So the war in Syria is a microcosm of the world war, let's say World War III, but without armament, through proxies. You have different factors. The oil is one factor of the oil, not because of the oil. I don't believe just because of this.
Of course, some might say that Syria, historically, your father and yourself have always supported the Palestinians and the UN resolutions governing the Palestinians. Yeah. Do you see Israel, which after all many believe to be a nuclear weapons of mass destruction power, as influencing policy in the European Commission, in the State Department, in the Pentagon?
Definitely. Israel is our enemy. They occupy our land, and it's self-evident, intuitive, to be part of anything that could happen against Syria, any plan, any instigation, directly through their relation with the terrorists. And Netanyahu was visiting the terrorists who had been treated in their hospitals.
You believe those pictures are true? The Israeli government was directly supporting Al-Qaeda-linked and ISIS-Daesh-linked militants trying to destroy your government?
The Israeli published these photos formally as a news. It wasn't our allegations. Second, they support, and every time the Syrian army advanced against those al-Nusra terrorists in the south, Israel used to bombard our troops. And whenever we advanced somewhere else in Syria, their airplanes started committing airstrikes against our army. That's what's happening. So the link is very clear. There was correlation between the Israeli operations and the terrorist operations. First through the terrorists directly, second through the Americans, third through the Europeans. They have one agenda and one interest, and before the war, not only during the war. So it's very normal and expected and likely that the Israeli should be part of all of this.
Of course, while Britain, the United States, European powers may have stopped trying to aerially bombard your country to destroy your government, the big news in the NATO nation media was the al-Baghdadi assassination by the 75th Ranger Regiment in Idlib province. Is it your understanding, going on from what you just said, that al-Baghdadi is essentially trained by the United States under torture in Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq?
Yeah. He was in their prisons, under their supervision. And the Americans were the one who released al-Baghdadi. So they wouldn't release him without any role. And suddenly Baghdadi became al-Khalifa of the Muslims in the world, as he assigned himself. He was prepared by the Americans to play that role. And we don't believe this recent story of killing him. Maybe he's killed, but it's not about what they mentioned. The whole story was about whitewashing the American hand from being hand glove of the terrorists during the last, not only few years, but during the last decades. This is like in the fiction movies when they erase your memory. They wanted to erase the memory of their public opinion that we were, or they were, in direct link with those terrorists, especially Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and al-Nusra. When Saddam Hussein was captured, they showed him. When he was executed, they showed the event of execution. When his children killed, they showed their body. The same with al-Qaddafi. Why didn't they show us the body of bin Laden? Why didn't they show us the body of al-Baghdadi? Just a fake story about being against terrorists and this very sophisticated operation. Maybe he's killed because he's expired as a person. They needed somebody else. And maybe they wanted to change the whole name of ISIS into another name to bring ISIS as moderate organization to be used again in the market against the Syrian government.
I'll get on how the media will react to that. But of course, the Trump administration thanked your government when it came to the assassination of Baghdadi.
We're not part of any operation.
You're not in dialogue with Donald Trump?
Not at all. There's no relation between any institution in Syria and any institution in the United States.
Nor with EU representatives at these recent Geneva talks?
No one at all. We don't have any relation with most of the Western countries who play a direct role against Syria.
I know you're antagonistic with the NATO nation Turkey, but Mr. Erdogan, and arguably yourself, must be aware that Western policy is liable for blowback into the European Union. What have you made of, say, European Union government's response to the possible outflow of British ISIS-Daesh fighters back into the European Union? How dangerous is it to be in London today, or Paris, or Berlin?
Actually, the relation between Erdogan and the EU is two ways. They hate him, but they want him. They hate him. They know that he's fanatic Islamist. They know this. And they know that he's going to send them those extremists or maybe terrorists.
He took in many refugees from your country, of course.
Many of them from Syria, and some of them, no, they're coming from different areas in the world, not only Syria, actually. But the majority are Syrian. Not all of them are extremists. Not the majority of them are terrorists. Actually, most of the Syrians who left to Turkey, they left because of the terrorism in Syria, because of the bombardment of the terrorists and so on. So they don't want him, but at the same time, they fear him. But from the other side, let's say that sending those Syrian and other refugees is dangerous. The most dangerous on Europe is to support the terrorists in Syria. This is the most dangerous part. So this is hypocrisy. How can you fear those few millions? The majority of them are moderates, and they have few terrorists, while you support those terrorists directly in tens of thousands, at least, and maybe hundreds of thousands in Syria, and you don't fear that they're going to go back to your country.
Well, the British government takes away the citizenship of British ISIS-Daesh fighters, arguably.
Yeah.
Okay, but then presently the fighting in Idlib, Russian warplanes in action there. How far away are we from reintegrating Idlib? Will there be an amnesty for these people that have tried to overthrow your government?
Yeah. Militarily, it will not take a long time if we start to liberate Idlib. But actually what we do, our plan, is to give chance for the civilians to leave. And that's what's happening. But they've been actually not living freely toward the government. They've been smuggled. They've been, coming like leakage. Few families every week, let's say, because they could be killed if they want to leave.
Southwards or westwards towards
No,
Europe?
Southward toward the government. So actually southward or eastward. This is very important for us to give chance for those civilians to leave in order not to be harmed.
But there are airstrikes backed by Russia and your military forces. Reports in the past few days of civilians dying.
No,
How soon is Idlib going to be reintegrated?
Those airstrikes are again the terrorist facilities, very simply. But in the
humanitarian organizations.
Exactly. In the Western narrative, in the Western media, the narrative during the 9 years of the war, that every Syrian or let's say Russian airstrike should be against the civilian and the humanitarian facility. Unfortunately, according to them, our bullets and missiles and bombs, they can only kill civilians. They don't kill militants, always, as you see. So no, this is against part of the Western narrative, and I think just discussing this narrative is just waste of time. Again, this is against our interest. Our interest lies in killing the terrorists in order to protect the civilians, not leaving those civilians, innocents, under the supervision of the terrorists and being killed by the terrorists.
Okay, but then what is the nature of your agreement with the Syrian Defense Forces? There are so many different names of organizations in your country. Many of them are the white hat good guys in NATO nation media. Is there power sharing going on? Who are the Syrian Defense Forces?
With the SDF. No, it's about regaining the control, full control of the territory wherever the Syrian army move, and bring with it the services of the government. So it has full sovereignty. on those territories. But this agreement is about the SDF withdrawing 30 kilometers southward in order to remove the pretext of the Turks to invade Syria. So let's say we are in transitional period because they are going to keep their armaments now. But we invited them to join the Syrian army. Some of them said no. The last few days, some of them said yes, we are ready to join the army. So we don't know what's going to happen yet. But we invited them to join the army in order to have a normal situation as it used to be before the war, when the law prevailed and the state prevailed, nobody else.
And as for Kurdish forces, are they just tired after so many years? I mean, your understanding is they took money from the United States, the CIA. Now you're welcoming them back to work with
First
Syrian
of all,
government.
the SDF is not only Kurds. It's a mix of Kurds and Arabs and others. Second, when we talk about the SDF, the Kurds in the SDF, they represent part of the Kurds. The majority of the Kurds, they had good relations with the government, and the majority of the Kurds support the government. But this part, which is called the PYD, is the one who's been supported by the Americans publicly, their armament, their money. They smuggled oil together. They are American agents, to be frank. Most of them. I wouldn't say all of them. I don't know all of them. But their policy during the last few years is to invite the American to stay, to be angry when the American wants to leave, and to say we don't want to join the Syrian army recently.
Aren't you saying exactly what Mr. Erdogan would say to me about the SDF?
About them. Actually, Erdogan has his own agenda, which is two parts. His own agenda as Muslim Brotherhood and the American agenda as a puppet. So it's two parts, but they work in tandem, these two agendas. But at the same time, those group of PYD gave him the excuse and the reason to invite Syria. That doesn't mean his invasion is legal. It's illegal in every sense of the word. But they gave him the pretext because he's been announcing for years that he wanted to invade the northern part of Syria. And he wanted to clean that area from the terrorists. And he mean the PYD. They kept give him this excuse. That's what happened. That's why they were to be blamed. But Erdogan is invader.
Okay, but don't you see how NATO, some people in NATO powers may think the one thing we do not want is peace between Ankara and Damascus.
Of course.
And you are participating in that divide and rule system that will have been designed in Western capitals.
Yeah.
No chance of any meetings with Mr. Erdogan?
With him, it's not raised, I mean, to meet with him. And I don't think while somebody is occupying your land will be the preferred one to meet with. We had some few meetings.
You negotiate with your enemies, not your friends.
Yeah, we are, but not with Erdogan, not me with him, no. It's on the security levels. It happened through the Russians. I mean, it was a tripartite meeting. It happened 2 or 3 times. It led nowhere. So we're not against the principle to negotiate with the enemies, especially when we don't consider the Turks as enemies. The Turks people are our neighbors, and we have a common history. You cannot make them enemies. The enemy is Erdogan and his policy and his coterie. To be against those groups in Turkey and in Syria, that doesn't mean that we see eye to eye in other aspects, especially after he invaded Syria publicly and formally.
You see, countries that have taken policy decisions like Syria, and I mentioned the Palestinians, I mentioned historic support for what are seen as liberation movements in the global south, they tend not to take up neoliberal economics. Last time I was here, all the talk in Damascus, amongst your ministers in Damascus, they were talking about privatization. They were talking about elites in Syrian society, educated in business schools, in Harvard, in the West. Is that not the start of the Syrian conflict? when you started to implement neoliberal privatization plans, destroying the fabric of this society?
Yeah. Actually, there was a debate about privatization, and as a government and as a state in general, we refused it. Even the unions in Syria, the majority refused the neoliberal policies because we know that it's going to destroy the poor. That was before.
But everyone was talking about it here in 2009.
We moved the steps toward liberation, but we still have public sector. Till this moment, actually, who protected the economy in Syria and the services is the public sector. Without the public sector, we wouldn't have survived this war. The role of the public sector, because we are a socialist government anyway. So we couldn't. Name. No, actually, we still have public sector, and we still support the poor. We still have subsidies of bread, of oil, of schools. Everything nearly free. Education is free in Syria. So we haven't changed that policy, but we opened the doors more for the private sector. So you cannot call it liberalization. You cannot call it.
So coincidence the conflict hit at that time, just after you were opening up the markets.
No, it wasn't.
Arguably to corruption, more corruption.
No, there was, let's say, explanation for the reason of the conflict. It doesn't have anything to do with this. It doesn't have anything. They said because there was 4-year drought, and the people become poor. No,
the climate change.
No, this is not the reason. This is not correct. These are explanations, just theoretical. In reality, the problem started when the money of Qatar came to Syria, and we had contact with many of the laborers and told them, why don't you come to your workshop? And they said, in 1 hour, we take as we take in 1 week. It was very simple. They paid them $50 at the very beginning, then later $100 a week, which has enough for him to live without work. So it was much easier for him to join the demonstration. After that, it was much easier for them to take them toward having armaments and shooting. And before that, we had very important...
I'm sure the Qatari government would deny that.
Of course, definitely.
I mean, because it was presented at the time somewhat bizarrely from anyone arguably who knows about the Arab world as a continuation of the Arab Spring from the self-immolation of Bouazizi in Tunisia. That is connected to this conflict, the Arab Spring, or is that?
Of course, there's interaction in this region because they know the same culture, the same background, the same circumstances. Somehow, not completely. Some of the demonstrations at the very beginning were peaceful, to be frank. Not every demonstration were infiltrated by militants. No, that's not true. In some areas, yes. Some people wanted to go because they wanted to improve their situation. Some people, they have their own ideas about improving, let's say, the political system, more freedom, more different slogans they used in those demonstrations. So that was mainly by the influence of what happened in other countries, like in Ukraine. But that's not what it continued. That's why the same people that I'm talking about, they stopped participating in the demonstration where the shooting started and the extremists started infiltrating, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, started leading the demonstrations. Why? With Allahu Akbar and using religious slogans in order to give this religious and sometimes sectarian mantle, to give it to put this mantle on the demonstration.
Something like that could be happening in Lebanon?
Lebanon is a sectarian country. We all know that because they have sectarian constitution. In Syria, we don't have sectarian constitution, so it didn't work.
But I meant the outside influences. Should Lebanon...
of course, no one will leave spontaneous demonstration to be spontaneous. But where will it go? That depends on the awareness of the people.
I've got to ask about reconstruction. Some people saying you're going to be too dependent on China, on Iran. The estimate is, what, $230 billion? I don't know how they calculate these things.
Yeah.
You expect now the diaspora to return, and there's going to be massive reconstruction. Yeah. Is that what's going to happen now?
Not very soon, because, you know, there's embargo in Syria, and the Americans tried hard during the last 2 years to not allow any individual not only companies, who wants to invest in Syria to come. They said, you're under embargo right away. So many capitals fear coming to Syria because of that embargo. But it's not the biggest problem. For the human resources we have, human resources enough to build our country. We don't need any human resources. We can build it gradually. So I wouldn't worry about this embargo, but definitely a friendly country like China, Russia, and Iran will have priority in this rebuilding.
Not European Union countries.
Every country who stood against Syria will not have chance to be part of this reconstruction.
No British
Definitely
trade
not.
deal.
Definitely not.
Do you think actually, and it has been raised, that the return of terrorists, as you call them, mass immigration that occurred after the Libya war, after the Syria war, they affected Brexit because of the immigration
to Europe? Yeah. Of course, the far right has been influenced by this to his own interests, of course. I'm talking about the far right. The most important thing, not the political aspect of it, the change in the society, how much Europe is ready or can or able to integrate those immigrants in their society. Even before that, on mass immigration during the last 10 years to Europe, they had a problem in integrating the immigrants in their society. Now you have this problem, and you have the terrorism that inflicted France and UK and other countries. They will be affected because part of those immigrants are the extremists and the terrorists and the people who doesn't want to integrate. They want to go there just because they want to leave this region for different reasons. Security, economy, and
but there'll be no security collaboration to help these countries cope with that?
There's no, and
from your government?
We're not ready, and we said very clearly that we're not going to help any country in security while they work against Syria in every aspect, economy, security, and in their politics.
The boss of MI6, on his opening speech, Alex Younger, he said, you, Putin, you make a desert, then call it peace. The human tragedy is heartbreaking.
Any British officials is in no position to talk about the humanitarian aspect anywhere in the world. They've been part of the invasion in Iraq. They've been partner in killing more than 100.5 million Iraqis. They've been a partner in attacking Syria with their missiles and the embargo on Syria and killing hundreds of thousands of Syrians. And at the end, they are American puppets. They're not independent, to be frank. So they're in no position to talk about the humanitarian issues anywhere in the world, let alone their history in India in the past. Forget about that colonial era. I'm talking about their current and modern history. They're not in a position.
Well, just finally then, what about the election here? Is there going to be a general election in 2021 in Syria?
Yeah, definitely.
And will there be more than one person on the ballot?
Last time we were 3, and this time, of course, we're going to have as much as they want to nominate. There are going to be numerous nominees.
Mr. President, thank you.
Thanks for you.